I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
Man, I love Lucy. And you know what? I write about Lucille Ball in my upcoming book, Skip the Line. I have a small section on her because she really is a great example of choosing herself. Like, her movie career had basically ended around the time she was 40 years old, and she had nothing going on. She was doing some radio shows, and those were kind of declining. But CBS wanted to do this brand new thing. Hey, let's do a TV series, a situational comedy. And she wanted to have her husband, Desi Arnaz, be her husband on the show. But CBS didn't want an interracial relationship on TV. So the story of how she made the most successful TV show ever in history, and the story of just her talent and her success is incredible. But not only that, my friend Darin Strauss wrote a novel that just came out. It's called The Queen of Tuesday, a Lucille Ball story. He's a great novelist, but he interweaves his family's personal story, which is very interesting and maybe even shocking, with Lucille Ball into it. It's a great novel. We talk about everything from writing, Lucille Ball, choosing yourself, what the current trends are in media, and more fun stories about writing. Jay, what else did we talk about?
You guys did talk about Star Trek. Actually, it was pitched. What?
We talked about Star Trek. I didn't know that one thing about Star Trek and Mission Impossible. And then, as Jay does, he hit record when we were just kind of doing our intro chatting in the beginning. And it's a really fun episode. So here it is, Darin Strauss and the Lucille Ball story. A lot of things I didn't know.
Where are you located?
I am in New York City. I mean, I'm not in New York City at the moment, but I live in New York City. And right now I'm in Key Biscayne, Florida.
Oh, nice.
I was in New York City all through the lockdowns. And then around July, give or take, I decided to spend a few months down here. So
yeah, it was a tough period here, I have to say. I mean, I went to Maine for a long stretch.
Yeah,
It's
most
tough.
people I know left.
I was gonna say I'm pro New York though. I'm not down with people moving out. I think we gotta stay here. We got to prop the city up. I think it's lame to leave when things get hard. It's a great town. I don't want to give up on it.
Well, I'm pro New York as well, but I found a lot of important people were in denial of the real issues simmering underneath. And I can't even tell you how many people I've called on both sides of the aisle. Uh, Everybody from like the Federal Reserve to mayoral candidates to officials on both sides in Congress and in the executive branch about the problems New York City was facing and possible solutions. And I just found the real kind of simmering problems underneath, some of which are virus related and lockdown related, are just nobody. Everybody I was talking to was in denial about both the problems and what I saw as potential solutions. So, but I got some backlash when I wrote about it, but that's another topic.
Have you thought about running for office?
No. A lot of people asked me to, actually, because yes, I got a backlash on this, but a lot of people also agreed with me that there's problems that are being ignored and that are in denial and wanted me to run for something. Like there's open seats in state assembly, there's open seats on the city council. There's a lot of different open seats because people aren't running.
Yeah, I feel like we need people with good ideas, and you obviously have them. And there are underlying issues in the city that need to be addressed.
I mean, that's true. And it's what was striking to me is that zero people I spoke to were thinking about short-term solutions. I mean, everybody kind of says, "Oh, it'll bounce back because of grit or whatever." But since I even wrote my initial summary of this, the data has gotten so much worse. And and now it's just a wait and see what happens. But we're not here to talk about that. I really want to talk about your excellent book, The Queen of Tuesday. And I call it a book instead of a novel. It is a novel, but there's a little bit of fictionalized autobiography / memoir. And I even love how you bring it to the present day as well. And we have a mutual friend, of course, in some of your italicized chapters. The book is about Lucille Ball and your grandfather's interactions with her. I want to put it that way for a second. I love the Lucille Ball story for many reasons. In fact, in the upcoming book I have a whole section on Lucille Ball for obviously different reasons than you. Nobody in my family knew her in the way that your grandfather did. But I just wanted to ask you, like, you also wrote some amazing books, Chang and Eng, which is a fictionalized version of the famous Siamese twins, which I thought was just, even when I first saw the book, it's like almost 20 years ago, right? This book came out.
Yeah.
I thought this was such an amazing concept to write a fictionalized version, because everyone looks at the Guinness Book of World Records when they're little kids or whatever it is, the Almanac of the Strange, whatever those little pop books that kids would read back in the 70s. And Chang and Eng, it's like, what the hell? How could this happen? And then they got married and then they got 21 kids, but they're attached to each other. What a great concept to write a book about that. So before I ask you about Lucille Ball, this was your first published novel, Chang and Eng. What happened?
Oh, thanks, James. I appreciate that. Yeah, I was going to graduate school in New York City, and everyone was writing these autobiographical books. And I just thought, my life isn't that interesting. I want to sell my first book, so I should find a really good story, because everyone was just writing these very small, personalized stories. And I thought, well, they're zigging. I want to zag. So what is a really good story? And I was homesick from work, and on Oprah, she had these conjoined twins on, and they were 8-year-old girls. And at the same time, without being asked a question, they jumped up and said, "We're a big girl now." And I just thought, what a fascinating sentence. We're a big girl now. So they obviously saw themselves as two people and one person at the same time. So that I thought was such a fascinating thing. I thought I could write something about that. And then in the first day of research, I came across the story of Chang and Eng Bunker, who were, as you mentioned, very famous conjoined twins. They were from Siam, which is now Thailand. And so they were so famous that the term Siamese twins just comes from them. And as you mentioned, they had 21 kids. They married sisters. They got caught up in the Civil War. So, the country's trying to break apart and brothers fighting brother, and they're trying to split apart and fighting. And I just thought, I can't believe no one's written this story. I felt like I had been given this great gift. And so I just jumped at it, and that's sort of been my guiding principle. People have asked me, you write historical fiction and non-historical fiction. Why is that? And I said, I want to write a really good story. So I always just go casting around for good stories, which you'd think would be self-evident. But so many writers, I think, don't choose to write big, exciting stories. I once did this event for Barnes and Noble, and this corporate person at Barnes and Noble said to me, there are two kinds of books: literary books, which you read slowly, and fun books, which you read fast. And I thought, I'm going to spend the rest of my career trying to prove her wrong, that you can have a literary book that is also a page turner.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I feel, and you mentioned that people like, let's say in the 90s, late 90s, were writing what I'm going to call these MFA style, quote unquote, literary reflective novels about a relationship they had with a professor, you know, and it was kind of just, I appreciate in a lot of those novels or collections of short stories, I appreciated the language and let's say the poetry of it, but you're right, the stories weren't compelling, and then you'd almost have to get a fix on, okay, now I'm going to read the latest John Grisham, which has no literary aspirations but is a page turner. And both sides would look down on the other, and I always felt like there's a role for both, but also it would be great. And there are some books in the middle that are good. I would say like Fight Club comes out there in the middle, where it's like almost a horror, but it's very literary. And there's quite a few books I feel that have that middle ground. But yeah, writing Chang and Eng, which you can argue is in the genre of historical fiction, I would not argue that at all. It was a very literary book, and you have a very literary style, and that's exhibited the most, I feel, in this book that just came out, The Queen of Tuesday, about Lucille Ball, where you're really taking chances. You're mixing genres with literary, with memoir, with this fictionalized story with Lucille Ball. I see in the reviews some people who are like Lucille Ball purists, like you feel like they watched I Love Lucy when they were 10 years old in 1951, and they wanted to just relive that experience, and so they didn't want any fictionalized version of what they're reading about it. But that aside, it's a very beautiful book. It's very literary, and you could see, and this is what I think, and I'm curious if you agree, and then we'll talk more about the book, but it feels like every book, even Chang and Eng or The Queen of Tuesday, ultimately a great novel is memoir, because you're going to tell your own views and perceptions. Like the voices of all the characters are really your voice ultimately.
Yeah, that's a great point. And thanks for the kind words, James. But yeah, I mean, well, a couple of things. One, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the characters who are closest to me in the books I've written are people whose biography is the furthest from mine. So I wrote a book called More Than It Hurts You, where the protagonist is an African American woman, and I feel like her and Aang and Chang and Aang are the people who are most like me in my books. And so yeah, I think you sneak yourself into all the different characters if you can. But getting back to like the big story thing, John Updike once said that that's what Moby Dick was. He said after Moby Dick, for some reason, American literature kind of split in two, where some people would take the really big stories and some people would focus on language and character. And he said, it's a shame that more books don't do both. And so I felt like, yeah, I want to write good, because you mentioned reflective characters in literary fiction. So I thought, yeah, I want to have deep characters and I want to have good prose, but I also want to tell a story that is something that means something to people. And so with this book, like you mentioned, it's a mix. I wanted to try a bunch of different things. I thought, I've written a bunch of books. This is going to try to combine all that I've learned how to do. So it's a weird mix, but I thought it would be the most fun way to do it if I could combine biography. So it's like a biography of Lucille Ball's golden period. It's a family memoir. It's about my grandfather and my grandparents. And then it's a novel about the love affair between Lucille and my grandfather, which is fictionalized. So it's all three. I felt like this would be the most fun way to tell the story of Lucille Ball, who I think, as you mentioned, is a fascinating person who's worth writing about. I know you're writing about her too. I mean, I think she's just kind of an amazing figure.
Well, our mutual agent, Suzanne Gluck, who is a character in your novel, I think wanted to introduce us for this. So I'd like to talk about Lucille Ball first, and then talk about your novel, because she is such an interesting character. She essentially defined or created sitcom television in the mid 20th century, and probably in terms of percentage of homes viewed in, it's probably the most popular show in history, and nothing will ever replace it. I think only a few shows were even close, which is like the Andy Griffith Show and maybe Seinfeld. What was really interesting to me about her is that she sort of half succeeded, half failed throughout a pretty big career, from the time she was a teenager to her 40s until really finding success. And most people don't know this. This is like inspirational for young people who feel like they failed by the age of 27. But also she didn't pander for success. So like when the critical moment being when they wanted her to do the TV show I Love Lucy, but they didn't want her to cast a Cuban, her husband, as her husband, she said no. When here she is desperate for success, and she says no to that for many reasons, which you point out also in the book. But she then makes a decision. They're going to go do this vaudeville act on the road, show that the American people are ready for a Cuban co-star. It was hugely successful. And then CBS was like, okay, let's do it. And I thought that was a very gritty and risky thing to do.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think, well, you mentioned it. She lived in upstate New York, and at 16 years old, she ran away and came to Manhattan to try to make it on Broadway. And she was told by a producer, "You're not funny. You're not a good singer. You can't dance. You're not pretty. You're not talented. You have no shot. Go home." And she kept trying. She ran away from home 10 times before she finished high school, and then failed in New York, went to LA, basically failed out there too. You mentioned she had some success over a long career. She was for a while called the Queen of the Bees, where she did a bunch of B movies, but then started to fail at that. She was fired from MGM, fired from the studio RKO. And really, TV was, as you mentioned, her last shot. And TV before her wasn't such a big medium. It was sort of thought of as third on the totem pole below movies and radio. So it was like, well, I guess I'll try this last ditch thing. And then, as you mentioned, they said, well, we don't want to show a white woman married to a Cuban man because, it was 1951 and there was a very racist time in a lot of ways. And so she risked everything to get her husband on the show and forced them to see that it would work. And then, as you mentioned, had greater success not only than anyone before, but really than anyone had imagined was possible for this medium. Her show was so popular that it was something like 88% of homes with a TV would tune in. Not 88% of people watching TV, but homes with TV. That means counting people who were out to dinner. So something like in the 90s percentile wise of viewers were watching her show, which is insane if you think about it today when it's so fractured, the audience. Her show had the equivalent of 85 million viewers a week, which is just nuts. I think the biggest show now is 8 million.
Right. And for all seasons except one, she was the number one show in the country, which I think beats out every other sitcom since then. Only American Idol and NFL Sunday Football beats it. So basically, she's the top sitcom ever. And most people don't know this. I mean, my wife was surprised when I told her. She and Desi Arnaz, of course, started the production company, Desilu, which produced I Love Lucy, among other things. But most people don't realize it also produced Star Trek and Mission Impossible.
Yeah. In fact, no one was going to take a chance on Star Trek, which I think makes her a very important figure too, because Star Trek pretty much redefined American culture. Because without Star Trek, there'd be no Star Wars. Without Star Wars, we wouldn't have sort of blockbuster culture. And no one wanted that show. It was pitched as a UN in space, which sounds particularly unpromising. And
I
she
had
said,
no
yeah.
idea that was Jay. Did you know that Star Trek was pitched as UN in space?
Yeah, I think so. I do know
What
that.
an odd pitch! Like, I could just see them like in the Hollywood typical pitch scene. You take the UN and you take space, combine them. Who the hell would want that?
I know. Well, Lucille Ball for some reason. Yeah, and Mission Impossible too, which is, a huge cultural thing. So what a figure she was, she was also the first female mogul in Hollywood. So when Desi, her husband, had drinking problems, she took over the studio. So at one point, she owned more studio space than any studio, any other single studio in Hollywood. And and this I think is very poetic, she ended up buying the studio spaces of MGM and RKO, the two studios that had fired her.
And by the way, it still happens that women in particular might have middling success in movies or whatever, and then starting around the age of 40, it's like almost a cliche joke. Like Amy Schumer even did a scene on this in Inside Amy Schumer where Julie Louis-Dreyfus, Tina Fey, all these like 40-ish actresses, this was about 8 years ago, 6 years ago, kind of get together to sail off into the sunset because they're turning 40 or they're above 40. But Lucille Ball, sort of found her voice or found her footing by going into probably was at the time a stigmatized genre, which was television. Like, nobody was doing sitcoms then. This is 1951. Like TVs were just getting popular.
Yes, and I think that's right. That's a great point, which I think I should mention more often when I talk about the book. 40 was when she began really as a superstar. And it is a truism, as you mentioned, that women after 40 have a really tough time in Hollywood, especially back then when it was even more misogynistic than now. And she broke through at 40. Literally, that was her age, 40.
Do you think she made money in the B movies? Like, do you know how much money she would make in like a 1938 B movie where she's not, it's not the hugest thing in the world?
I don't know. I don't know specifically what she would make per movie, but I know she lived a very comfortable life. I mean, the studio system back then was really powerful, but movies were so big because TV wasn't a thing. I think she lived a really nice life as a B movie actress. She also was a communist. That was another interesting thing. She had a period when she was a B movie actress that she was an avowed communist and would have these communist party meetings, at least one known party meeting in her mansion, which is kind
In
of
her
funny.
mansion.
Yeah,
So did she have a mansion off of the B movie income?
yeah, yeah. I think the thing about B movies is that you could make 20 of them a year, 15 of them a year. If you look at her filmography, it's pretty nuts. I mean, she was in like 30, 35 movies before being on the air.
Yeah, it always amazes me, and not just with her, with almost any actor or actress. You think of them from their big movies, but then you look at their filmography, and they're in like 1,000 movies.
She was in
And
some funny ones, like weird titles, like A Girl, a Guy, and a Gob. I don't even know what that means.
and then she did, and this is where I Love Lucy comes in. She did a bunch of radio shows, which is weird because I don't even know if that's anymore a thing. But like, what was the radio show that I Love Lucy was based on? Was it? It was something like My Favorite Husband.
My Favorite Husband, yeah. And it's really interesting to me. So I've been approached by a podcast company to write some scripted podcasts, and I thought, it's just like radio plays. It's basically the old 1930s model where you would tell a story only over audio.
Yeah, and I was about to ask about that because, of course, we're doing a podcast right now, and I always follow the industry. And for a while, and I don't know if this is still true, it probably is, but like fictionalized, serial, episodic podcast series are a thing, which is really weird considering the last time it was a thing was like 1938 or
Yeah.
1948, whatever. So I don't know what the appeal is, but then also, audiobooks are trending upwards for the past, 6, 7 years. So people, I guess, commuting to work or in the gym, have reawakened, the audio format in a way differently from traditional radio.
Yeah, and it's I've looked into the form. It's hard to tell a story just with sounds. I also wrote a comic book once, which is sort of the opposite.
Olivia Twist,
Yeah,
good idea.
yeah, thanks. I thought it would be kind of interesting to take Oliver Twist and make it sci-fi and put Olivia in the future. Make Oliver Olivia, and so that was not so literary. That's more that's more for fun. But I'm looking now at her her filmography here. And in 1935, she did one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine films in 1 year. So yeah, I think that's why she had that money. Even if they were B movie roles, you do 9 movies a year from 1935 to 1950. That's a lot of money.
Well, actually, let's just see if a random. Okay, so let's just take one of her last ones. Here's one. She's co-starring with Henry Fonda. Oh no, that's not 1968. Okay, let's take The Big Street, co-starring Henry Fonda. So it's a decent role, decent movie. They must have had a decent budget.
It's a good movie. It's a good movie, actually.
I never saw it.
Yeah, I had to, I watched a bunch of her movies because in research, um, she was quite good in that.
She was making $1,000 a week, which that's like making, I don't know, $20,000 or $30,000 a week during the filming of that movie.
Yeah, that's the 1942. So what would that be? Inflation calculator.
Like a 20x.
Yeah, so yeah, 20,000 a week. 1940. Also, I'm always amazed when we look at the past at how much further money went because you had so many fewer things to spend money on. Like there's so many things you have to spend money on. You want like a cable TV, a streaming service, a music service. Like everything costs so much money now. I feel like 20,000 a week back then. There's so many fewer things to spend money on, right?
Yeah, because think about it. Back in like well, particularly also you're living at that time was around the Great Depression and World War II, so there was deflation and rationing. So it's almost as if they were living in a permanent economic lockdown because there were very few things to spend money on during the economic lockdowns during this virus. So it's a similar type of thing. But you're right. And she even admits she like she says about The Big Street, it was a regular check, but she was just still a regular B actress. And turning 40, she's not going to be playing in these sexy co-starring roles. But let me ask you this, and this starts to get into the timeline of your book. When you watch The Big Street, was she kind of have the clown-like or comedic role that she would later be famous for in the TV series?
No, actually, it's a noir, and she played it straight. I mean, there are a couple of movies where she's just like a straight ahead noir kind of siren, trading on her sex appeal. I mean, she was a beautiful woman. I mean, it's interesting. She was very sort of self-conscious too. She would always talk about how she wasn't talented and wasn't pretty, and I think she was all those things. Um, she was an interesting talent because she couldn't write her own jokes, and so she was really dependent on other people being good. But I think if she had really good material, she was great. Like on that show, I think she's really a kind of brilliant comic actress.
Well, a lot of very well-known, successful actors and actresses, I shouldn't say a lot, but many of them study, and this is going to sound weird, but to people who don't know about it, but they study clown theory. So it's not clown like in a circus, but there's a real art form to being a clown where you use your authenticity and the language of your body to basically make an audience like practically die from laughter. And there's various schools on clown theory, but she was like a natural clown. And you refer to this in the book. And there's this one line where, she's starting to do I Love Lucy. And you write, she's thinking to herself, the best actors don't quite deliver memorized lines. They speak their own spontaneous thoughts that happen to have been written beforehand by someone else. That's not skill. That's not a technique or even art, Lucille realizes. My brain just thinks exactly what the writers guessed the character would think, only my brain thinks it more correctly, more fiercely. And it's because I think they lucked into this role where she's able to take this natural, amazing clown ability, which is not an easy ability, and as you speak through her, she's able to accentuate the words of the writers and play that role with her full body and authenticity, which we see, which is why America loved Lucy to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I did some research into acting. I didn't know anything about acting, but I did some research, and I felt like that was what she would have thought. I mean, it is an interesting skill, and it's so dependent on other people. Writer or musician, you can kind of make your own luck in a way. If you write a good book, it's your book. If you play music, that's the music you're playing. If you're an actor, you need someone to give you a good script and then to direct you well. And so I think that's why a lot of actors that I've met are, I think, quite um, self-conscious because they're so dependent on other people. I think it makes you sort of lack confidence in yourself in a way. I mean, that's the thing I've noticed about so many of the actors I met, that they are sort of lacking in some confidence. It's funny because they're so charismatic.
Yeah, but they're charismatic to the screen, but that doesn't say anything about who they are. And this is not a criticism of them. It just might be maybe they're charismatic on the screen, but they're an introvert and shy in real life, or who knows.
Hmm.
So, but she, had this, B-list skill as an actress. She was a dancer. She was this, she was that. But really, she physical comedy, it was her thing. Her face had, a much greater vocabulary of expressions, I think, than many actors and actresses. Her she was her body had that authentic comedic clown-like thing going on. So they would write these lines for her. She wouldn't just say them. She would take those words and really be that character. This was her. And again, I think that propelled her from being known to being, world famous / celebrity.
I think you said it so well. Her face had a really wide vocabulary of expressions, and I think that's the key right there. And they did love her, and they do love her. I mean, I've heard from so many people since the book came out. I heard from a friend of hers who knew her and kind of reached out to me, and that was sort of wild.
What did she say?
It was him. It was this guy Lee Tannen. He wrote a book about her, about his friendship with her, and he said it was really nice. He said he was very skeptical of the book because it's fictionalized, but he said he read it and felt like he was listening to her talk. He said, "You really got her," and that was shocking to him. And so that was one of my favorite reviews. Even I've been lucky with the reviews in real places, but to hear from a friend of hers that um, I captured her voice and he felt like he was listening to her and hanging out with her, that was great.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. I want to get into the other aspects of the book, but what else did you learn about? Did you learn anything new about Lucille Ball in your research that surprised you? I mean, and again, I think the most inspiring thing is that she almost dictated, I should say, her own career. She wouldn't let the producers ultimately tell her what to do, even if that risked her career being over. And in particular, the choice of forcing them to have Desi Arnaz in the role of her husband.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's so much about it that is so um, praiseworthy, and that surprised me. You know, all the trailblazing stuff we talked about, how popular she was, how she was the first woman to do all this stuff. She was the first pregnant female body shown on television. But the thing that surprised me the most, I guess, was Desi's behavior and how this very strong, very powerful, courageous, beloved woman was just humiliated again and again by him at the height of the show. And I wrote something about this for Vanity Fair, actually. At the height of her show's popularity, she was, uh, he was rather, Desi was caught by Hollywood Confidential magazine with two prostitutes. So this is, you know, the 1950s, a very prudish time when couples, even married couples, couldn't be shown sleeping in the same bed because sex was something that was so uh, verboten on television that we couldn't even have a bed where a married couple would sleep. At the same
I think
time,
that lasted through the 70s too. That lasted a long time.
yeah, and as that's happening in the 50s, there's a story in a magazine saying, "Yeah, here's Desi Arnaz with two prostitutes," and it was widely known. But the show was so beloved that it just was pushed through. People just didn't care. But that's humiliating for anyone. But imagine that being in public, your husband cheating on you. And we talked about a bunch about why how she pushed CBS to have him as her husband, which was very admirable. But the reason she did it was because she was afraid Desi would cheat on me if I don't watch him 24 hours a day. She felt like if he's not my husband on the show, we'll be spending too many hours apart, and I can't trust him not to cheat. So the sad thing is, she did the right thing. She made CBS have this interracial marriage on TV, but she did it because she didn't want him to cheat, and he cheated anyway.
And so, given that she was so confident in her choices in what seems like most other areas of her life, what do you think is the source of insecurity for her that almost normalized cheating in her marriage? Like it seemed like even in the book, because obviously cheating is occurring quite a bit in the book. And I think most people now, it's like there's one person cheats and the marriage is over. And why wasn't she thinking like that? And particularly given that it's not like she had to worry about money or anything like that. Like what was going on in her head?
Well, I mean, I don't want to psychoanalyze her too much because, you know, she's a real person, but, and I'm not a trained professional who ever met her. But I think, you know, we
Screw
can,
that.
yeah, we can
We're just
speculate.
talking.
Yeah, we're just talking. No one's listening. I think we can speculate a little bit um, about that.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that it's, well, she really loved him. I mean, he had this real sway over her. He was very charismatic and very attractive guy. But also, I think she was abandoned by her parents in a very real and devastating way. Her father died when she was a young girl. So that's hard, obviously. And then her mom quickly remarried and left her, not with her grandparents, but her step grandparents. So imagine you're a young kid, your dad just died, and all of a sudden your mom's remarried and you're staying with these people, these old people you don't even know. And so for years, she lived apart from her mom, and then her mom would come and go from her life. And so I think she was really desperate for love and had a real fear of being abandoned. So, you know, I did it. I did speculate even, in public.
Yeah. I know you speculated a lot. So okay, so this I don't want to give away I don't know how much you want to talk about the finer details of the book, but this occurs in the first chapter, which is a character who, by the way, I didn't realize at first. This is my own naivete, but you're the character in the first chapter who comes up to her in this party and meets her. Is your a fictionalized version of your grandfather, Isidore Strauss, and basically they have an attraction between them. And throughout the book, she's kind of wondering, what is the attraction? I mean, it seems like he had his own charisma. She would go back and forth between, is it his looks? Is it the conversation? Is it their kind of lust for each other? Is it the fact that he's like a normal guy and not in this, very flashy scene where everybody's cheating on each other and so on. And meanwhile, your grandfather is, or Isidore in the book is kind of really diving deep to speculate on his own feelings. I mean, he's married to Harriet in the book, your grandmother, and he's dealing with the guilt, and also his attraction to his wife and his feelings about his wife, but he's like obsessively attracted almost to Lucille Ball.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all the things you mentioned. I think she was angry at her husband, who was someone she loved, but who disappointed her a lot. And I think I mean, fame is tough. I've known a few famous people, and it just seems so hard, I mean, I was friends with two celebrities who passed away. Philip Seymour Hoffman was a very good friend of a very good friend of mine, so I knew Philip pretty well. And I became friendly with Carrie Fisher, and I saw in both of them how difficult it is to be famous, especially Carrie. I mean, that's a real intense fame, and I think, not to be glib about it, but I think it really is why, in a big way, why both of them are no longer here. And so I felt like for her, this normal guy would have been seductive, just the normality of it. And with my grandfather, that was the real challenge with the book. I mean, I've written about infidelity before, but when I'm writing about my grandparents, I felt like, okay, I have to be really, I wanted to do it in a way that honored both of them, because it's easy to write infidelity when you say, okay, well, one of the people in the marriage is boring, and so the other one is just strays because the marriage is unhappy. But I realize that's kind of a simplification, and people sometimes cheat if the marriage is better than that. So I thought, if both people are compelling, then what would push someone to cheat? And I was thinking about this. Um, I say in the book that in books like Anna Karenina, there's the husband. So in that book, Anna's married to this guy Karenin, who is a bore. He's just a terrible bore, and she leaves him for this very sexy, attractive guy named Vronsky. And so that book's about her leaving Karenin for the sexy Vronsky. And I realized, I think in relationships, every spouse is both Karenin and Vronsky. Like everyone starts out as Vronsky. It goes in reverse. Everyone starts out as Vronsky and ends up Karenin. When you first meet someone, if the relationship is any good, then you think they're the best. And then 20 years into marriage, everyone becomes a little bit, even, I'm in a very good marriage, I think, but, everyone becomes a little commonplace. I'm sure my wife doesn't feel as excited to see me walk in the room after 22 years as she did when we first started dating. So I wanted to examine that a little bit too. We talked about big stories earlier in the podcast. I felt like I haven't read many love stories that actually deal with what it's like to be in a long relationship. I was really influenced by books like Love in the Time of Cholera that get into obsession and love and where those things overlap and what it's like to be in a long marriage. I haven't seen many books do that lately. American literary books do that lately. So I thought that's another big topic I wanted to dive into.
Well, it reminds me of the last scene in The Graduate, right? So he spends his whole time, the whole movie, trying to, they both are kind of ultimately dancing around this love story, which culminates in them like in the back of a bus with her in her wedding dress from who she was supposed to get married to. And you kind of get this sense that, oh, now there's the next 40 years of their life. It may not go as well as they thought. You get this sense right at that last scene, just in his eyes. And, but there was so much drama leading up to this point that it had to happen this way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a great scene. I think that scene takes the movie and actually moves it from entertainment into art. Like it's a really fun romantic comedy or sort of sexual farce, like the older woman and the younger man, and then that moment is so profound because it's the only romantic comedy I could think of where after the romance and the comedy is over, it shows real life in a really intense way with just a shot. And that's great filmmaking right there, I think.
So there's this parallel, of course, in this book between your book and Lucille Ball's story, which is that she mixes fact with fiction. Her husband on the show is her husband in real life. Her kids on the show, I believe, are her kids in real life, or maybe not. I don't know, but it seems
Actually,
that way.
no, it's complicated too. The guy playing the kid playing her son was actually her real life son's best friend.
Okay, but he has the name of her son, so it's all mixed together.
Mm-hmm.
Or he's Little Ricky instead of Desi Jr. But you obviously, reached in and pulled out of your own story your grandfather, his relationship with her. All the characters in the book have real inner lives. There's no villains. They're always wondering about their choices and their opportunities. Maybe Desi has this particular cruelty is he doesn't really care. And this is in real life. Now, I'm not even talking about your book. This is in real life, it seems, too. He doesn't really care about the effect of his actions on Lucille Ball. But what made you decide? Was this the impetus for the book? Was some kind of, did your grandfather tell you a story as you suggest in the book? Or what happened there?
Well, thanks. Yeah, first of all, for talking about the not being villains, because I think that's an important thing in books, which you don't see often enough. I feel like there's a great line from Saul Bellow where he said, "When you write well, you become familiar with due process." And so, you want to be like the defense attorney for all your villains and the prosecutor for all your heroes. I think you want to be like, yeah, she seems great, but here's where she's not 100% perfect, and he seems like a total villain, but here's why he's doing that. And for my book, I had a dream about Lucille Ball, and I thought, I don't know why, but I thought, wow, that'd be a good story. I didn't even know what caused me to think that. And I wrote down Lucille Ball and Papa Izzy. So I just had this weird dream and woke up, wrote that down, and went back to sleep and looked at it the next morning and thought, what the hell is that? And then I realized, so I asked around, and I realized that my grandfather had been at a party with Lucille Ball, and I must have heard about this when I was a kid. And so Donald Trump's father, and this is all true, Donald Trump's father, when he bought a bunch of real estate on Coney Island, the old amusement park outside of New York City, he he built a bunch of crappy housing, as Trump's dad did. And so there's this landmark, this beautiful glass and steel structure called the Cathedral of Fun. It was a historic, beautiful building, and Trump's dad was going to tear it down and make crappy housing. And so, in order to blunt the criticism from the press, because he knew that it wasn't going to be a popular thing, he was a very good manipulator of the press, like his son. And so he thought, I'll throw a party and I'll have a bunch of celebrities there. And at the stroke of midnight, we'll all throw bricks through the glass and we'll take pictures, and that'll be how we break ground on this new project. And it worked, and there wasn't that much negative press. It was all like, oh, here's celebrities throwing bricks. Hard to believe when you read about it today. But my grandfather was a real estate guy who knew Trump's dad, and Lucille Ball was a celebrity, and so I think that's where they met. And so that scene is the opening of the book, where Trump's father is doing this thing. And I felt like that was sort of resonant, with today's situation, a modern Trump moment, destroying something historical and beautiful about the country. And I would say my grandfather had this incredible skill. He's like the only one who could do this, I think. He was the only guy who's got the business skill to inherit like 5 or 6 New York City high rises and lose everything anyway. Like he somehow had this anti-talent of ending up broke when you have investments that seem foolproof. Like he was a real estate mogul in New York City, and by the time he died, he was worth nothing. So he was just a terrible, terrible businessman, and that's something I was always interested in as well. And how does someone? He wanted to be a writer, and I think that's probably why I was a writer, because I always knew he wanted to write, but he was from an old world family. His father came over from Russia and said, "You have to take over the business," and so he did, and then he ran into the ground.
And so did he meet Lucille Ball at that party? And
That's the story. I mean, I haven't been able to actually confirm it factually, but that's the story that I've
that's what he
gotten.
told you?
He didn't tell me. No, people in my family said that's what they heard. Um,
And and you imply he really did have that script treatment as well. And that's what you were trying to pitch at
that's
William Morris.
that's totally invented. There was no
Oh,
script treatment. Yeah, I mean, the book mixes fact and fiction, so He didn't have that script treatment. He wanted to be a poet. So in the book, James and I share an agent, and so I made her a character, and I had my younger self go to her with this proposal, and she was sort of like, "No, get out of here." But that wasn't really how we met. I just threw that in for fun.
Yeah, I was confused because this is like years after you wrote the very successful Chang and Eng, so I assumed you had representation.
Yeah,
So
no, yeah, I became. She was only my agent since 2011, I think.
so the script that your grandfather fictionally presents to Lucille Ball, this is what I was wondering, is that it was obviously a ridiculous script to be produced in Hollywood in the early 50s because it's about a freed slave in the 1860s. There would be like zero movies about this in the 1950s.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the jokes of the book in a way where I thought like they were saying in the 50s like you can't make a book you can't make a movie about an African American man, and now in 2020 they would say you can't make a movie about an African American man because he's a white filmmaker or white writer. So they in the 50s they would say you can't write about someone because he's black, and now they'd say you can't because you're white write about someone because he's black. So
Yeah, and also again, it parallels her story a little bit, where she's taking chances, bringing Desi Arnaz, a Cuban, onto her show, which is something you couldn't do, but she was able to do.
yeah, it's interesting too. Like I realized this in researching the book that every episode of that show was basically a comic reenactment of her life because she always wanted to succeed and kept failing and wanted to get on the show, so to speak. And every episode is a woman who they say is not talented trying to get onto Desi's show.
Yeah, it's this quest, this kind of American dream of this quest for fame or relevance or whatever you want to call it. And let me ask you this: like you're from Brooklyn, you've been writing, you've won literary awards, you've written these great novels. Also, by the way, a great memoir, Half a Life, which is about this pivotal moment in the first half of your life. And I don't know, your neighbors are probably, the Jonathans, like Jonathan Lethem, Jonathan Safran Foer, and what's their stuff so literary. It's beautiful, but again, it's not like the everyday person is going to read, a 500-page literary novel about old Brooklyn. But what do you think was the stamp of their careers? Like they had this beautiful arc in their careers, in terms of, was it their awards or what happens in New York City with the literati?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I know Jonathan Lethem. He and I were in a poker game together for a while, with a bunch of other writers. It was writers poker. It was me. It's broken up now, but it was me, Jonathan Lethem, Colson Whitehead, Mila Goldberg, who wrote BCs, and Nathan Englander, and that was really fun.
Nathan Englander, by the way, great short story writer. Colson Whitehead just wrote a book about poker.
Yeah, he's a shark. He's a real shark, Colson. He's really good at it. And then Jonathan Safran Foer teaches with me at NYU. I think that's the thing about New York. It is there. It's so hard to live here, and we talked about this a little bit before. The troubles it's had recently and everything, and all those are true. But I think there's something about being in a place where there are so many people who want something. I remember someone said, whatever you're into, whatever it is, good or bad, if you live in New York City, you can find other people who are into that thing. And if you're a writer, you'll find other really good writers here. It's just there's something about that that's so exciting. I grew up in Long Island, and I didn't only 25 miles outside of New York City, and I didn't know anyone growing up who was doing anything creative. I had no roadmap. My parents had no friends who were doing anything creative, and so I was totally on my own. And then, but coming here, it was like I found this community of people who wanted the same things and were trying to do the same things, and that's something that I think is really valuable.
Yeah, the great thing about New York City is that, and I've felt this since I was a kid, is that it's like what you say, no matter what you're interested in, there's a subculture in New York City catering very specifically, no matter how narrow that niche is. And not only is there a subculture for it, but the best people in the world are in that subculture in New York City, and you could interact with them and learn from them and be friends with them, and your careers could rise up with other people who will eventually be the best in the world in the category as you all grow up together. I mean, there was so many different subcultures that I've had the pleasure to be a part of in the past 50 years, almost 40 years, since I was a little kid. And that is the great thing about New York City. And I'm not sure of any other city that replicates that. I mean, or maybe you could say Paris in the 1920s, post World War I, but it's a beautiful thing about New York. And
Yeah, I mean, you go on the subway and you hear musicians in the subway who, saxophone players just playing for free, and you think, yeah, there's probably not a guy who's as good as that in all of Trenton or whatever. Not to. No, I'll never sell a book in Trenton again, but you know what I mean.
big loss. It's where the huge audience is, all the Lucille Ball fans. So another thing it's worth mentioning well, first of all, I wanted to ask, when you decided, okay, I'm going to be a writer, and this is kind of coming down almost from your family. You say your grandfather wanted to be a writer. How many years of loss and rejection did you experience before Chang and Eng?
I got pretty lucky with Chang and Eng. I went to graduate. Well, I guess my loss and rejection, a lot of it came. Well, it always comes though. That's the thing you realize about writing, that you always get rejected in some way, which I'll get to in a second, I guess. But my rejection, I guess, first came. I didn't get into any of the graduate schools I applied to, so I wanted to go to NYU or Columbia. I wanted to stay in New York, and I didn't get into either of those two schools. But then 7 years later, I was teaching at both schools, which made me feel like really pretty good. But it was hard. When people tell you you're no good, you believe it. Actually, someone was telling me that recently. My friend, the writer David Lipsky, was saying the difference between writers and other people, or people who succeed at writing and people who don't, is often a self-delusion, maybe, where most people, if someone says you're no good, you sort of believe it and you try something else. Where I think there's so much rejection in writing that if people tell you you're no good, a lot of us are like, okay, well, I guess I'll make it better. And now that's a very valuable skill, because I know that my first draft isn't so great. I think a lot of people will get notes in their first draft and think, oh, I'm not a good writer. Whereas now I've been writing long enough where I know, okay, this draft isn't good, but I can make it good.
And so what were you like? Did you write a bunch of novels that were rejected, or was like, where's your classic origin story of rejection?
I got lucky. I sold that book pretty soon after grad school, so I got lucky with that book, Chang and Eng, my first one. But as I was saying, rejection comes all the time. Like, even after you have a hit book or you win a bunch of awards, I'll send a story to the New Yorker and they'll say no, or you get a bad review. So I just think that's the thing about a career in the arts that is hard on people's psyches. Like, I read that Philip Roth never won the Pulitzer Prize, and that tortured him forever, and he felt rejected. This is Philip Roth, who was the most successful literary writer in America probably for a long time, but he never won the Pulitzer Prize. I was reading Saul Bellow's letters, and Saul Bellow, one of the few Americans who actually did win the Nobel Prize, and he, in his letters, is always complaining about rejections and how the New Yorker never takes any of his stories and all this stuff. And I just realized, wow, if Saul Bellow and Philip Roth feel that way, it's not a career that is good for for your self-confidence, because there's rejection at every level all the time.
I think any career that gives you inner pleasure. So, like, let's say, I'm not saying a marketing manager for Procter and Gamble is not happy with their job. They could be very happy, but like writing or acting or any type of individualist career is it's worth it, because there's a lot of pleasure, but it's very competitive. So there's going to be a lot of rejection. So you need tools to deal with the rejection. I think a writer has to deal with, multiple sources of income, to use a cliched phrase, and B, you have to be able to navigate not only career rejection, but people who hate you.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that I have a memoir that I wrote, and that was even harder in that one, because it's hard enough if you write a book, you spend a couple years writing it, and it's just out in the world, and people just say bad things about it sometimes. But if you read a memoir, and they're like, yeah, I really didn't like this character. Someone was telling me that they wrote a memoir and it was rejected because everyone said, I really don't like the protagonist. And the person was like, that's me, so it's hard. Yeah, it's really hard.
That's a Curb Your Enthusiasm joke too, because Larry David's hanging out with Jason Alexander, who played George Costanza, who's the Larry David character, and Jason Alexander is saying, "Oh, I was playing such a schmuck," and Larry David said, "Not really," and, and so they kind of had that discussion. Yeah. You've done memoirs, comics. I think I read you've done a couple of screenplays, right? Or were hired to do some screenplays.
I wrote the screenplay for my first book, Chang and Ang, which was never made. I sold it to Disney and wrote the screenplay with the director, Julie Taymor. And it was really unlucky. The president of Disney got fired right before it went into production. And then I wrote it again with the actor Gary Oldman. I wrote a totally different draft of it. And that never happened. But that was fun. So I've been doing some screenwriting stuff. I'm writing a script for my memoir, so hopefully that'll happen. It's a much different art form. So it's been sort of it's actually helpful when you go back to books because the screenplay is so story driven, you can't have any excess fat. So then when you go back to writing novels, I think it's actually quite helpful.
Yeah, it feels like exposition, kind of like setting the scene has to be, of course, it has to be shown because there's zero telling. And so, it's all dialogue, screenplays, dialogue and action.
Yeah. And every scene has to serve the story. You can't, a lot of literary books you read and there'll be a scene and you think, well, why was that there? It doesn't happen so often in movies, because someone's paying millions of dollars for each scene,
Right. And now, of course, there's the new genre of the Netflix special miniseries, which I feel this book, The Queen of Tuesday, the novel about Lucille Ball, this feels to me like Netflix's I Love Lucy.
I would love that. Yeah, I think we're talking, there's a competing Lucille Ball project, I think, that is maybe complicating things, but I think it's so different because there's a Aaron Sorkin, I guess, is maybe going to do a biopic of Lucille Ball. But this is so different, I think, that, this is the love story between my grandfather and Lucille Ball. So it's actually out right now. I should say this to Emma Stone. So we'll see what happens, knock on wood.
Well,
I probably just jinxed it.
No, I don't know. There's got to be, now with Netflix, Amazon, HBO Max, Disney Plus, and a billion other things. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's got to be huge demand for stories.
Yeah, I think there is, and that's I think that also the miniseries is such an interesting form that it's not constrained like a movie, so you can do. It's very novelistic, I think. Like a 2-hour movie rarely gets the scope of a good book, I think, but a 6-hour movie could.
Yeah. Well, Darin Strauss, thanks for talking to me, author of The Queen of Tuesday, a Lucille Ball story. And, of course, also we talked about Chang and Eng, and we talked about your memoir, A Half Life, and Olivia Twist, comic book series.
Well, thanks, James. Yeah, no, it's just so great to be here. It's a great podcast, so I'm really thrilled and honored to be a part of it. It's great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. And I definitely recommend the book, and I love Lucille Ball also. So thanks for writing this.
Yeah, I can't wait to read yours.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.